بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم لا حول ولا قوة إلا بالله العلي العظيم الحمد لله رب العالمين وصلى الله على سيدنا ونبينا أبي القاسم المصطفى محمد وآله الطيبين الطاهرين لا سيما بقية الله في الأرضين أجل الله تعالى فرجه الشريف اللهم أخرجني من ظلمات الوهم وأكرمني بنور الفهم اللهم افتح علينا أبواب رحمتك وانشر علينا خزائن علومك برحمتك يا أرحم الراحمين. Inshallah, tonight we discuss the Ash'arite school of Kalam. As we said before when we discussed the Mu'tazilite theology, we said that it was from second half of the first century that certain issues emerged about justice of God, about Qadha and Qadar, about Ja'b and Ikhtiyar, that led to the formation of the Mu'tazilite school in theology. Their methodology was very much based on using reason and was very intellectual. They were not always successful, and sometimes maybe they overdid this because they tried to find rational explanation for everything, even if there are things which are beyond the capacity of reason. But it was good that the people of reasoning and they developed a school of Mu'tazilite in Kalam. One of the things that Ayatollah Mutahhari says about them is that they were also very much concerned about defending Islamic view against objections and attacks by some other groups. Even they used to train muballighin, used to train preachers and people who were able to introduce Islam, present Islam in other places. They used to send these people to other territories. But their main challenge was coming from Ahlul Hadith, which in that time meant people who were against the usage of reason in religious studies. They had the idea that we should go by the literal meaning of the Hadith and the Quran, and they had the idea that Kalam is forbidden, is a bid'ah, as we said before. So this attack against the Mu'tazilite weakened them, plus, as we said before, they brought politics into Kalam, and for some time it was doing well because the Khalifa Ma'mun was with them, then Mu'tasim, Hadi, they were with them. They used the power of Khalifa to stop people who disagreed with them about the issue of the eternity of divine speech, about Kalamullah. But when Mutawakkil came, then he did the opposite, and because people saw that it was the Mu'tazilites who started using politics in theology and put some of their opponents into prison, now they didn't have that much sympathy with them. So the Mu'tazilite school, little by little, became very weak and almost disappeared, almost. Not 100%, but almost disappeared. What happened was, there was a person called Abul Hasan al-Ash'ari. Towards the end of 3rd century and beginning of 4th century, he was a Mu'tazili person. And he was attending for a few years the lessons of Qadi Abdul Jabbar al-Mu'tazili, a great Mu'tazili figure. And they say he became very strong. And Ayatollah Mutahhari says he was like a mujtahid in Kalam. Mu'tazili, he had his own, position and opinion. But he split. He left the Mu'tazilites, and because he had this background, this training, and was very well equipped with these theological arguments, he formed another school of Kalam, which is now very much in agreement with the ideas of Ahlul Hadith, but putting them on a kind of Kalami foundation and vehicle. Because before that, there was no a school of Kalam in our Sunni brothers, among them. Apart from Mu'tazilat, we didn't have that much Kalami movement. We had Ahl Hadith, but they were not Mutakallim. Khawarij, they were not that much, seriously discussing. The only Kalami school for majority of Muslims was Mu'tazili. But now Abu al-Hasan al-Ash'ari learned from them and reintroduced the ideas of Ahlul Hadith. Now he's arguing. He's not like Ahlul Hadith who said it's bid'ah to discuss. So Abu al-Hasan al-Ash'ari, who died in 330, very close to beginning of, Ghaybat Kubra. He has a book which is a kind of essay, Risalatun fi istihsan al-khawd fi ilm al-kalam. In this essay, this book is on goodness of diving into the science of Kalam. Khawd means to dive into something. Istihsan means to find something to be good. So he says Kalam is not haram, it is actually good to use Kalam as a vehicle. Although people like Ahmad ibn Hanbal, for example, they were against it. Ibn Taymiyyah, who was a follower of Ahmad ibn Hanbal, has a book against Ilm al-Kalam. But Abu al-Hasan al-Ash'ari says, no, Kalam is good. So now we have a very prominent Kalami school, quite opposite to the Mu'tazilites. They have most of the time different views, but they support the idea of Ahl Hadith. So, from this point, Ahlul Hadith were divided into two groups. Some people continued the same approach against Kalam. They are followers of Ahmad ibn Hanbal. Some people joined Abu al-Hasan al-Ash'ari and became part of the Ash'ari movement. We have famous figures in the Ash'ari school. For example, Qadi Abu Bakr al-Baqilani, who was contemporary to Sheikh Mufid. He's a famous Ash'ari figure. Abu Ishaq Isfarayani, Imam al-Haramain Juwayni, who was teacher of Ghazali. Ghazali himself was Ash'ari. Ghazali, who died in 505, Imam Muhammad Ghazali. We have two Ghazali. One Ghazali is Sufi. We are talking about Imam Muhammad, the one who has Ihya Ulum ad-Din and many books. Ghazali gave a mystical flavor to a school of Ash'ari. He brought lots of mystical and spiritual ideas to the school of Ash'ari. Another person who is very famous is Fakhruddin al-Razi. He is also Ash'ari. And he had lots of discussions with philosophers. They call him Imamul Mushakkikin. He was the Imam for the people who just made doubts. Because he was questioning the ideas of philosophers, but it was actually helping the philosophers to develop further and to fortify philosophy. So he is also Ash'ari. Even Rumi, Mawlavi Jalaluddin Muhammad Balkhi, is Ash'ari. But because of his great mystical, spiritual tendencies, he has many ideas that have overshadowed the Ash'ari approach. But even he is Ash'ari. And today, many people are Ash'ari in the Sunni world. Khaja Nasiruddin Tusi, rahmatullah alayh, who is one of our great scholars in different fields, in Kalam, in philosophy, in astronomy, in mathematics, who played a great role in protecting the Ummah against the dangers of Mongols. And because of him and some of the scholars, Mongols became Muslims. He did two great, not many great jobs, but in particular, I want to mention two great jobs. One was that he supported the idea of Muslim philosophers. For example, Ibn Sina in his Al-Isharat wa Tanbihat. This is not in the book. Al-Isharat wa Tanbihat is one of the books of Ibn Sina, very important book. And Khaja has brilliant commentary on Al-Isharat wa Tanbihat. The best commentary on Al-Isharat wa Tanbihat is by Khaja Nasiruddin Tusi. And after that, Fakhr Razi and people like him have lost their weight. Because they were very much attacking, Ibn Sina and philosophers. He settled most of those debates. He has a book on Kalam. He has many books, but he has one book which is very, very famous, is Tajreedul I'tiqad. Tajreedul I'tiqad, in which he very brief, very precise and concise book. He managed to bring reconciliation between Kalam and philosophy. Before that, many mutakallamun, many theologians were against philosophy. He brought them very close to each other, and after him, no Sunni, no Shia mutakallim was going another direction. Everyone was influenced by him. Many people made commentary on Tajreedul I'tiqad. Sunni, Shia, Ash'ari, non-Ash'ari, all. They loved this book. Maybe they disagreed in certain points, but they couldn't ignore this book. And the best commentary, of course, is the first commentary, which is by Allama Hindi, Kashful Murad, which alhamdulillah we have just started teaching Kashful Murad. So that's the best commentary on Tajreed. So, after Khaja Nasir wrote Tajreedul I'tiqad, Ayatollah Mutahhari says, Now we go back to the book. 90% of Islamic Kalam, whether Sunni or Shia, took a flavor from philosophy. So they become more interested in using intellectual discourse. And he says if you look at some of the major Sunni books on Kalam, like Mawaqif, Maqasid, by Sunni scholars, you see they are very much influenced by Khaja Nasiruddin al-Tusi. He also says, the more we come forward, Ash'arites have gone away from the founders, like Abu al-Hasan al-Ash'ari, and they have become closer to the Mu'tazili and philosophical way of thinking. Now we mention some of the ideas of the Ash'arites. You are already familiar because when we were talking about Mu'tazilah, we mentioned some of these. But now, all together, we give you a list of the ideas of the Ash'arites. First, they didn't believe in Tawheed al-Sifati. They didn't believe that Allah's attributes are identical with His essence. They believe the attributes of Allah are separate from His essence. The second opinion is that they say Allah's decrees, qaza and qadar, include everything, which is good. But as you remember, Mu'tazilites here had an issue because Mu'tazilites were excluding human voluntary actions. They believed in tafwid, that Allah has delegated this part to human beings. The rest is under His control, but this part He has left to human beings. This is tafwid. Ash'arites here have a good idea. They say no, Allah's decrees include everything. Even our voluntary actions are under His qada and qadar, not outside His qada. This is good. 3, they had the idea that like good things, bad things are also from God. Of course, this is something that needs explanation. What do you mean by bad things are from God? If you mean that we have Tawheed Af'ali, yes. But if you mean that God is responsible for our sins, no. So here we have very clear position. Inshallah, we will talk about Shia position later. From next chapter, we start Shia Kalam. Number 4, they had the idea that human beings are not free and their actions are created by God. Number 5, they didn't believe in intrinsic goodness and badness. They believed that these are given by religion, by God. There is no objective criteria for goodness or badness. Number 6, they believe that it's not necessary for God to do lutf, to have favor upon us. You know, one of the rules in Kalam, inshallah we will talk about it later, is Qa'idiyya al-Lutf. We had it in Aqaid also. Qa'idiyya al-Lutf. Qa'idiyya al-Lutf is a very important rule in Kalam. We will discuss later, but briefly I can tell you here. Anything كل ما يقرب إلى الطاعة ويبعد عن المعصية ولا يصل إلى الإلجاء ولا حظ له في التمكين فهو واجب. What does it mean? Anything that God can do to make obedience easier for us, and disobedience farther away from us, and would not force us. So make obedience easier but would not force us, and is not necessary condition for having power to do good things. Then this is lutf. So this is a technical definition. This is lutf. Why they put all these conditions? Because if it forces us, then it's not lutf. If you are forced to do good thing, so this is against free will. Or if it is a condition for power, again this is not lutf, because without having conditions, you are not required to do good things. So, if it is not reaching the level of enforcing, and if it is not a condition for having power, and just helps us, they say this is rationally necessary to be provided. This is qaida lutf. It's very important qaida in Kalam. For example, sending prophets, sending imams, they say this is lutf of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Khaja Nasiruddin Tusi, rahmatullah alayh, has a famous sentence about Imam Zaman in Tajreed al-I'tiqad, the book that we mentioned. And this sentence has become very well known in the history. He says, وَجُودُهُ لُطْفٌ. Existence of Imam Zaman is lutf. What does lutf mean? It means what we said. It means it helps us to be obedient, but it doesn't force us. It's a help. And it is not a condition for ability. It means without which still we are able. But this helps us. So, وَجُودُهُ لُطْفٌ وَتَصَرُّفُهُ لُطْفٌ آخَرٌ. Existence of Imam Zaman is lutf, and if he is able to exercise his leadership, this is a second lutf. So it's not that either he exercises his leadership publicly or there is no benefit. His existence is a benefit. If he is able to exercise his imamah publicly, that's his second lutf. وجوده لطف وتصرفه لطف آخر. Okay, so if وجوده لطف وتصرفه لطف آخر, so why Allah has given us the first, not the second? Why He has created him, but has not given him freedom to do tasarruf? It says وَعَدَمْهُ مِنَّا. Is the fact that Imam Zaman is not exercising his leadership publicly is because of us. We have been obstacles, not that Allah has not lutf. You see, very brief, just few words, full of ideas. وجوده لطف وتصرفه لطف آخر وعدمه منا. Inshallah, we talk about it later. Ash'arites don't believe in the rule of lutf, divine favor, divine grace. They don't believe in this. They say this is not necessary. God can give us His lutf and can also deprive us. Also, they say it's not necessary for God to do the best. Mu'tazilites had the idea that God should do the best. Aslah. What is the best? Ash'arites, they say no. Because, they have such a tendency that they think we have to give God 100% freedom. If we say God has to do this, has to do that, we are limiting God. But they don't realize that you are not giving God freedom. You are actually limiting God in His perfection, because we are not making these things obligatory for Him. We are saying that with His essence, you don't expect anything other than being gracious and doing the best. So, if someone has superficial approach, they think, oh, these are very nice people because they are saying God can do everything. But indeed, this is not a service to say God can do arbitrary things, God can do, vicious things. It's not service to God. But, for people who are not very educated and talented, it's easier to sell this kind of approach than intellectual approach. Another thing is that unlike philosophers and Mu'tazilites, Ash'arites had the idea that human beings don't need to have power before doing something. Power comes with the action, not prior to action. Because we see that for a human being, before doing something, he should have ability to do or not to do, and then he does or he doesn't do. We said power belongs to both sides. They say no, before action there is no need for power. When action is created, that's the power. Another thing, they believed that there is no similarity, no resemblance at all between God and anything in His creation. No similarity. No resemblance. We believe that God has no similar, but it doesn't mean that in nothing we can resemble Him. Actually, there are many things that we are supposed to resemble Him. We never become like Him, but for example, God is merciful, God is knowledgeable. We should also seek mercy and knowledge. Another idea is that human beings do not create their own actions. They just acquire them. Maybe you have heard the theory of kasb. Because the Quran says, لَهَا مَا كَسَبَتْ وَعَلَيْهَا مَكْتَسَبَتْ. Yeah, for men and women, there is what they do, what they acquire. So they couldn't deny that we acquire good actions or bad actions. But then they say God creates in us. We are just the subject and God in us. So my action is not your action, not because I am freely doing my action, just because God has created this action in me, not in you. But I am not free. This is the idea of the Ash'arites. Another idea, as we said last week, they believe that God can be seen with these eyes, physical eyes, in the hereafter. In dunya we cannot see Him with physical eyes. In the hereafter we can see Him with physical eyes. If you ask them, what difference this world or that world is going to make, physical eyes are limited. Doesn't make difference whether it's this world or that world. They had the idea that fasiq, those who commit major sins, they are mu'min. Khawarij said they are kafir. Mu'tazilite said manzilatun bainal manzilatayn. Another thing, they had the idea that God can forgive even without tawbah. Of course, we agree with them. But Mu'tazilites had the idea that without tawbah, God is not going to forgive. Mu'tazilite didn't believe in shafa'ah, intercession. Ash'arites believe in shafa'ah. Because very much mentioned in the Quran and Hadith, so they believe in shafa'ah. Here they are like us. They had the idea that God can tell lies or break His promise. There is nothing wrong in doing that. If he doesn't do it, it's because he said he doesn't do it. But to tell lies in principle, in essence, has no problem for God. They had the idea that universe is created at a certain time. It's hadat zaman, is temporally created. Muslim philosophers have another idea. They believe that divine speech is eternal, but not the actual words that God, for example, spoke to Moses, but his speech in him, in his essence, that is eternal. Kalam nafsi is in himself. They had the idea that divine actions serve no purpose. Unlike philosophers and Mu'tazila said that God has a purpose. Yes, the purpose is not to benefit himself, it's to benefit others. But Ash'ari say it has no purpose. Because they thought if we say has purpose, we are making God needy. They say, تَكْلِيفُ مَا لَا يُطَاقُ مُمْكِنٌ. For God to compel people for doing something that they are not able to do, it's not a problem. God can ask people to fly. They are not able to do it, he said, no problem. He can ask for anything. But we say, no, it's impossible. Abu al-Hasan al-Ash'ari had many books. It is said more than 200 books. About 100 books are mentioned in biographies. But most of them are not available. His most famous book is Maqalatul Islamiyyin wa Ikhtilaful Musallin. This is the most famous book of Abu al-Hasan al-Ash'ari, which is about different ideas of different sects, different schools of Islam. Maqalatul Islamiyyin means those who are Muslims, they have different opinions. Musallin, those who say prayer, they have different opinions. So it's about different ideas, different Muslim sects. Another book is also Al-Luma, which is available. He had great influence on Islamic world. Ayatollah Mutahhari says, unfortunately. Because his influence was not positive. Ibn Sina, in his book Ash-Shifa, many times without mentioning his name, brings his ideas and criticizes the ideas of Abu al-Hasan al-Ash'ari. Even some of his own followers, like Juwayni and Baghilani, didn't agree with some of the ideas of Abu al-Hasan al-Ash'ari. He says victory of the Ash'ari school was very, costly and, had great cost for Muslim Ummah. Because, unfortunately, this encouraged people to go for the literal and zahiri translations of the text and just accepting this as their doctrines and ideas, not too much thinking, reflecting, intellectual approach. He says, if Mutawakkil was like Ma'mun, maybe this would not have happened. But because he was very interested in the Ash'ari movement, he helped them. And then when Saljuqis also ruled part of the Muslim world, they were also interested just in this approach. They were not very interested, so they also promoted this type of approach. But Buwayhids, who ruled part of central Iran and Baghdad, Buwayhid, they were Shia dynasty. And they were very interested in intellectual approach. And some of the ministers of Buwayhids had good kind of support for Mu'tazilites ideas. They liked the Mu'tazilites. Like Sahib ibn Abbad, he was himself a kind of Mu'tazili thinker, although he was a Shia. Or Ibn al-Amid, he was against the Ash'arites. At the end he says, we don't want to support the Mu'tazilites because they have made also big mistakes, as we explained and we will explain later. But what was praiseworthy in the Mu'tazilites was that they were interested in the power of aql and using aql and having rational approach. This was a good thing. Maybe some of their conclusions were not that good because they were not very trained. And they didn't benefit from the guidance of the Ahlul Bayt. But they had good approach. But those who say we should not use reasoning in religion, then creates lots of difficulties because they go for superficial interpretation sometimes. Of course, some Ash'aris are great thinkers like Ghazali, but you cannot compare Ghazali with Ibn Sina, for example, when it comes to theology and philosophy. Okay, Alhamdulillah, we finished this lesson. The next lesson is about the Shia Kalam and some of the ideas of the Shia and how Shia tried to bring harmony between reason and revelation, between reason and the scripture, whether it's Quran as the first hand or the hadith which is coming under Quran as explanation of the Quran, how Shia put them in great harmony with each other. This would be inshallah what we discuss in the next session. وآخر دعوانا أن الحمد لله رب العالمين.